Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Effective Resume Thursday. Very glad you're with us this afternoon. It's May 18th, 2023. Please note this event is being recorded and is currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, you give consent for your name, picture, and information to appear. Please note that any comments you put in the Zoom chat window will not appear in the recording. For those people on Zoom, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just enter them into the chat window. For those watching on Facebook today, thank you for joining us. Please just put any questions you've got into the comment field. We really appreciate that. Also, if you'd like to network with other people who are on the call today, please feel free to go ahead and put in your personal information like Tim did, with a name, LinkedIn address, position he's looking for. Let us know how we can help you and connect with other people who are on the call today. This is all about expanding your network. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Morris. Back in 2008, I started a website called careerdfw.org. In 2012, I launched the second website, careerusa.org, to help those around the United States. I have written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search that you may not know. Since 2007, I've been facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. The group's been around since the late 1990s. They meet every Friday morning, and I'll tell you about our upcoming program. We've got a great speaker lined up tomorrow morning. I'll tell you about that speaker at the end of this presentation. And since 2017, I've been a member of the practice interview team. The practice interview team's been around since 2014. And if you'd like to have more information, you can reach out to dallaspickroo.com how to sign up for a free interview for you. Remember, your resume, your LinkedIn profile, they don't get you a job. They get you a phone call. How well you practice your interviewing skills, that's what's going to get you your next job. All right, well, our speaker today is Locke Alderson. He's a career consultant. He's been helping job seekers for many, many, many years. And today he's going to talk about what recruiters look for in resumes. So Locke, thank you for being with us, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Jeff. I think everybody should be able to see that.
We can. Great.
We took care of the technology today. That's great.
Wow, that's like the quickest ever.
Jeff knows that I'm a little bit technically challenged on Zoom, so but that's my background. Thanks for having me, Jeff. As you can see on my bio that's there, I spent a number of years in recruiting and HR with corporate America and had my own recruiting firm here in Dallas for about 12 of those years. I've also spent about 21 years in career consulting, starting as a volunteer at our church, doing workshops. And that developed into 2013 when an outplacement firm out of New York contacted me, Mullen International. They said, you've been doing it as a volunteer for a while. Would you like to try it on contract for 90 days? So I did. And that 90 days stretched to 4 years and 90 days before Mullen sold out to Locke Harrison. Everybody was laid off, and Locke Harrison picked me up a month later, and I stayed with them for about 2 years. Resumes are an interesting topic, and they're always ever changing. If you've ever been to one of the bookstores like Barnes & Noble, you notice that their section probably has at least a dozen books, some of which are talking about that. But what we want to talk about is actually what recruiters look for in resumes. Well, if it were a perfect world, we wouldn't need a resume, but it's not. So we need a resume to communicate who we are. So what are resumes, what really are used for? Or why even have a resume? What's it used for? Well, basically, it's a listing of your jobs and employers. Okay, if you just have to fill out an application blank, that's a good list to have with you. I know I teach a class, our church's outreach center for job readiness skills, and a lot of those people don't have a resume. And I say, well, you ought to put one together, because even if you don't need a resume, it's a good list for the employers that you've had, the dates, and your contact information. But it's a piece of advertising. Many of us still get advertisements for credit cards or travel. I know we're on the mailing list for at least a couple of dozen cruise lines, and we get at least a brochure at least once a week. Most of them go into the trash. Well, don't think of your resume as that kind of situation, but most resumes I would say 75%, 80% of them get rejected, either by a human set of eyes or by the applicant tracking software. So, but that's what you're trying to do with your resume, is get somebody to pick up the phone and call you or send you an email. We'd like to have contact with you and talk about your background and our requirements. So it's a piece of advertising. It's also a script for the interview. Again, it's the document that they're going to ask you questions about your background and how you match up with their requirements. So that to the extent that you know what's there and that you wrote it, you're in better shape than somebody who had somebody write it for them. So it's a script. I know when I owned my own recruiting firm here in Dallas, I had one candidate that was interviewed by a hiring manager, and he interviewed 40 candidates. How anybody can remember 40 candidates, I don't know. But he did select my candidate for the second round of 5 candidates before the job was canceled. But in that doing, the resume is probably the reminder after the interview of who you are. And even, as I said, after the interview, it's a reminder who you are. What should be included or excluded from your resume? Well, the first thing is a marquee or headline. Some of the resumes still don't have a headline, which is generally the title of the job that you're applying for. Think about, what do you want to be known by after somebody meets you? If you're a recruiter or an accountant, again, we tend to put labels on people because it makes it easy to identify them. The same thing happens with your resume. So make it easy for them. If you don't have that headline on there or that title, job title, they may not consider you for that position, particularly when it goes through the computer. The computer actually tears apart your resume and reformats it into their format to go into a database. And one of the fields it looks for is the job title that you're looking for. And there's no match there. Again, the likelihood is you'll get rejected. Needs a summary. It's your branding statement of who you are and what you've done, along with some short examples that support your headline. Likewise, you need keywords from the job posting. I'm going to show you something that normally isn't talked about in presentations on resume. How do you cut apart the job posting to include some of that information in your resume? But again, you want to focus on who you are, what you've done, the contributions that you've made. I want to talk about some assumptions that writers of resumes make. They make some assumptions that are wrong, and they overestimate the power of the resume. I think that it's going to do that. Well, think about that. You need to tailor your resume a little bit for each position that you apply for, because the old cookie cutter resume where you could go to Kinko's or FedEx office and make 50 copies and just send them out, those days are long gone. They assume the resumes actually get read. Well, I will get news for you. Probably 75% of the resumes that go to the Fortune 1000 companies actually go through a computer before they actually get to a human being to be actually read. So again, that's an assumption that you make. They underestimate that the resume is received for consideration of posting. It's possible that a recruiter might get as many as 500 resumes for any one position. I know there can be as many as 300 in response to a posting online in the first hour. So if they've got that many resumes to look at and the recruiter is working with 10 or 15 openings, you can do the math yourself, and it's quite a task to go through all of those. Again, they're going to take some shortcuts and look for keywords and things that stand out to them. Overestimate the qualifications. Sometimes the people actually reviewing, when it gets through the applicant tracking software, aren't the recruiter or the hiring manager. It may be a clerk, a personnel assistant, a recruiting assistant in the HR department. And they may not know what the job is other than the title and what they can see in the job posting itself, the qualifications. So those people may only have a high school education, and you're a PhD. Sometimes there's a disconnect in what you're trying to communicate with people. Wrong content. I mentioned the cookie cutter type resume. Again, that's the problem with putting a resume on your LinkedIn profile and using that to apply for jobs. It may not meet the qualifications that the people are looking for, because that resume is kind of cast in concrete. It hasn't been tailored at all to who you are and what your qualifications are in comparison to the job. Again, assuming that the reader will understand the content, you want to have a simplified content so the high school graduate can actually read it and understand it. And again, one size covers all. Again, wrong assumption. And likewise, they're thinking more is better, longer resumes. I've seen one resume, a couple of resumes are actually 7 to 10 pages. They don't get read after the first or second page. Or less is better. Some people shortchange themselves and only go with a one-pager. Again, today, probably 2 pages is the average, maybe 2.5 pages is a good length on a resume. Things that a recruiter doesn't look for in a resume. This is something that you need to be aware of. They don't look for vague content. What do I mean by vague content? Vague content comes across as fluff. Again, things that you have done, maybe true statements, but without supporting documentation or examples, it tends to be rather vague in its description. Too much information, the personal data, you can leave that off. Married with children, they aren't interested in that information, so leave it off. Kiss of death phrases that I mentioned that can convey the impression of fluff. Words like results-oriented, responsible for, proven leader, strong interpersonal skills, hands-on, technician. I don't know about you, but I don't want a hands-on, somebody who learned to be a brain surgeon by doing it hands-on. I want somebody who's studied and seasoned about that. Seasoned professional is okay, but it doesn't tell what. A seasoned professional may be somebody walking alongside you and tossing salt over your shoulder, that there's a seasoned professional. Again, self-taught is another one of those words. Again, without amplification, these are kiss of death phrases. And some kiss of death words, again, dynamic, utilized, utilizing, decisive, powerful, successfully. These are words that typically, without more to them, are words that are viewed as kiss of death and tend to get rejected. They overestimate what somebody has done. And while they may be true, they don't give enough information to make an accurate decision about them. Using the first person in resumes is generally frowned upon. I did this or I did that, me, my. Again, you want to limit the use of that. I don't know too many resumes that I've seen that are successful when they use the first person. It's okay to do that with a LinkedIn profile, but again, it's a slightly different type of document. Words that blunt your experience. Every time you did this, all the time, none of these things, any of these, those are words that again dilute or blunt your experience. And words recruiters rarely search for. Again, team player is one of those. Jack of all trades, entrepreneur, operator, franchisee, consultant, owner. These are not the kind of words that recruiters generally search for. Okay. And one of the things that you want to take a look at is if you have a resume and give it to people and ask for their opinion, you might get different opinions from different people. One of the things I would suggest for you to do is to ask the background of the person giving you the opinion. Are they a job hunter like you? Or they know somebody? Is it somebody that knows about your profession? Is it a recruiter who's actually hiring for the job? It is a career consultant who's actually worked with people looking for jobs. Again, take a look and ask the questions about where are they coming with their advice. But a good resume is one that's easy to read. Again, a resume generally is looked at in 5 to 10 seconds. So make it that way. It's easily understood. Again, high school graduate, think of. It's usually concise, limiting to 2 pages, and it makes it easy to contact you. Your contact information is at the top, not at the bottom of the first page, as I've seen on a number of resumes recently. Okay, and it speaks directly to the requirements of the job posting. Those are just some things that recruiters look for in a resume. Resumes for the recruiter that generate results. First, you want a headline that matches the job posting. And again, I mentioned that typically when your resume goes on the internet and goes to a company, they put it through a computer, through an applicant tracking software, and it tears it apart and puts it back together in their form. Again, one of the fields that it looks for is the job title. If you don't have one, chances are greater that you will be rejected. And if you have an objective on your resume, delete it. Most companies really don't care about your objective. They only care about their requirements and what the candidates are looking for. A good summary is usually about 3 to 6 lines and usually has a couple of short bulleted accomplishments to support the headline. They add credibility to your experience. Again, visually appealing and easy to read, has keywords and skills from your profession, and we'll take a look at word saturation in a minute. Again, limit the duties and responsibilities, the description there to 3 to 4 lines, and follow it up with a couple of bulleted accomplishments. These are the results that convey value. The implication is this is what I've done for my employers, and that's what I can do for you, Mr. Employer. Let's move on and take a look at some resume basics. What's the big deal about real estate? Well, generally you want to limit it to about 2 pages. If it's longer than that, again, it may not get read. it's shorter than that, you're shortchanging yourself. Again, the one exception possibly there is for somebody who's a new grad, but even new grads have done things in college, maybe some projects they've worked on or part-time work that led credibility to their experience. The next thing is talking about the format, and choose a format that includes one of these fonts. I like Arial myself, but Tahoma, Calibri, or Times Roman are generally the fonts that are recognized by the applicant tracking software. Some of the more expensive applicant tracking software will actually recognize a lot more software fonts. But again, if it's an inexpensive applicant tracking software, these are the ones that are generally recognized. And you can notice a difference in point sizes, or 10-point font on Calibri, on Arial, on Tahoma, and Times Roman. Again, there's some of them are a lot smaller or easier to read. That's why I like Arial or Tahoma as well. You want to set some margins around your resume, top right, left, bottom. I know when I print some documents here, I printed one this morning and said your margins are very small. So it may leave out some of what's there when a resume is printed out. Again, another thing that you want to do and consider is left justified, right ragged right, rather than justified where every line is even and there's no breaks in the lines. And limit your use of bold, italics, and underlines. Again, those can be distracting. Again, if you use all bold, it can mean that it's shouting at somebody. Again, that's the email etiquette, that you don't want to use all bold. And again, want to use, most resumes are in reverse chronological format. And again, you want to use and go back about maybe 10 years on something like that. Okay, scannability I've mentioned, but don't use text boxes, headers, or templates. Again, text boxes and templates, again, the resume that you've taken the effort to format so nicely probably won't show up the same way when it goes through the applicant tracking software. And headers, if you have your contact information in a header, it may disappear when it gets to the applicant tracking software, because it may consider the header or footer as a null field and not capture that data. Moving on in terms of type fonts, this is a weird one that I'd like to find. Okay, but don't use the fancy fonts. Here's a fancy font. This is called Wingding. And if you've never, I've gotten a resume in Wingding. I think somebody did it, or I don't know whether it was my computer that didn't recognize their type font. But again, Wingding is one of those type fonts on the top of your Word when you look at fonts all the way to the bottom. I probably could have done a Control-A on this resume and converted it back to Arial, but I liked it because this resume was actually 7 pages in this. So don't use Wingding or a fancy font. That's one of the problems with it. I don't read Klingon like this. Again, there's a shadowing on watermarks and graphics. They tend to confuse computers in some cases and actually crash a computer because it can't deal with the contact. The contact information that you want to have is your phone number and your email address and your LinkedIn URL if you have one, and your zip code. And zip code is important because recruiters identify you when they do a search. They usually limit the search to 25 miles, and this is the way that they find out the 25 miles. Again, when you do searching, you notice one of the search criteria, it defaults to 25 miles. Now, you can raise that to 50 or lower it down to 15 or 10. But again, 25 miles is identified through the zip code. Headline is so important because I mentioned it identifies with who you are. A summary expounds, and you want to use concrete examples in your summary. If you have a skills table, or if you're a technical individual that's worked with computers, it's a good idea to put that on the first page. And you want to make sure that you keep your skills current. In some cases, list the latest version of the software that you may have worked with. Again, when you get down to the experience section, it's a good idea to have the company name and location on the left. I like the dates out on the right. If you have more than one job at a given company, you might do an umbrella for the first line with the company dates, all-inclusive dates to the right. And then for each job have the dates beside it. Again, right next to the job title. If the company is not a well-known company, like a company that I worked for when I first came back to Texas in 1976, was a company named Mostec. If you don't recognize that name, that's because that company went out of business in 1983. And other companies are like that. So you want to give a one-line description of who the company is and what they did. Actually, Mostec at the time was the world-leading producer of random access memories. You want the job title and duties and responsibilities, limit that to 1 to 4 lines. And we'll take a look at a resume and see what they actually looks like. Reason being, if it gets longer than that, it won't get read. It's confusing. After that, you have the relevant experience along with some bulleted results. Again, what do I mean by bulleted results? These are the accomplishments that you have. These are the results from performing those duties. Again, a lot of the resumes I read simply talk about their duties and responsibilities. They don't talk about accomplishments. One of the ways is you do accomplishments, and we have a sheet on that just a little bit later, is have a bullet with an active verb and 1 to 2 line examples, and we'll show you some examples of that. Keywords, use them more than once. I know when I had my own, when I was a recruiter at Siebel Corporation, they were purchased by Oracle, and I made that move. We're looking for a Siebel consultant in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I ran a job posting up there and got 75 responses. 50 of them didn't even have the word Siebel in their resume. So they were not candidates. So spell out that word more than once. Those that had it more than once were more likely to be the candidates I were looking for. If you use acronyms like American Management Association or American Marketing Association, spell them out the first time that you use them, because you don't know what your recruiter knows or the hiring manager, or if they understand that. Education, certification, awards, keep them current. Most of the resumes, again, have their resume, they have their education when they got their degree. I know my degree is more than 50 years ago now. So again, you wanted to show what you've done to keep current with your experience with me, the awards and certifications or professional development activities that you might have had on the job. You want things that you want to omit. You want to omit references. It takes up some space on your resume. If they're interested in your resumes, they're probably going to ask you for them. Also, omit your pictures. The only exception to having your picture on your resume is if you're an actor or a model. I know when I worked for Continental Airlines, we would frequently get pictures with attached to resumes for flight attendants. Again, those were automatically set aside and not considered. We didn't want to be considered as discriminatory for not choosing somebody who wasn't very attractive. Again, so that's the reason to leave a picture off of your resume. Do the spell checking, the grammar. It's too easy to do it, and too often it will hurt you when you don't check it. And double check those numbers, particularly phone numbers and dates. Again, I have a tendency to transpose digits, and so I can get one or two digits out of line and they don't match up. So again, it may be difficult if you've got the wrong phone number on your resume. It's hard for somebody to reach out and contact you. And again, this situation, does everybody lie on their resume? No, honesty is the basic thing that you want to consider, because there's too much information about you out on the internet that they can check. Again, cross-referencing your resume with your LinkedIn profile or anything on Twitter or Facebook, those kind of things, people actually do check you out on that situation. Another situation, I mentioned applicant tracking software earlier. When the internet came along, it made it possible to send out multiple resumes at one time rather than having to type out your resume and type a cover letter, stick it in an envelope, address the envelope, put a stamp on it, and take it to the mailbox. Where you might be 5 or 10 per day, you could send out 50 or 100 resumes in a day. So what did companies do? They adopted software to deal with that. But just some basic statistics of why you might not have heard on your resume. Again, you have a good resume and are not getting responsible, just some basic statistics on average, and this is done by a professor at San Francisco State University. For each posting, there's probably 200 people that say, that's interesting. Maybe 100 of those actually sent in a resume. Again, 75 to 80 of them ended up in the B pile, often screened out by the applicant tracking software. Of those that remain, 20 to 25 may get looked at by a real person, and 5 to 10 of them get a phone interview. And again, face-to-face interviews aren't as prevalent today. You might have a couple of rounds of interviews on the phone. And actually, the numbers I used to have about an 85% acceptance ratio of candidates that I'd screened for jobs. Some other tips for consideration, getting your resume considered. Read the job posting carefully, and if you don't match 80% of the requirements, don't apply, because the likelihood is it's not going to get considered. You want a scannable resume with no fancy fonts or borders or shadow or graphics. don't want to put your contact information into the header. Again, it may not show up when it goes through the applicant tracking software. Proofreading, headline, and a summary, and try an alternative deliveries method. Maybe it's snail mail as opposed to email, using UPS or FedEx envelope. Again, you can do that. You might send it registered mail, so somebody has to sign for that envelope, or become an employer referral. Frequently, companies have employer referral programs where they actually pay somebody a bonus if you get hired by that company. When I first went with Siebel, because it wasn't a well-known company, our bonus was $2,500 for a Siebel consultant if somebody was hired and lasted for 6 months. Again, I had one individual that submitted 6 candidates who were hired in his first in 3 months. So he got a nice bonus as a result of that. So again, try some alternative delivery systems. Well, let's take a look at a resume. This is an actual copy of my resume, again, from Mullen International. Again, you notice a couple of things about that. It's got a 4-line summary up here. It's got a bulleted accomplishments of things that I've done as a career consultant with Mullen and my Lee Heck Harrison. Here's, I've used a slightly different format rather than bullets. I've used asterisks. Again, I should have probably go back and clean that up in terms of asterisks. Okay. The screen is very sensitive, but you can notice what you have, but those resumes tend to get looked at in 5 to 10 seconds. One of the things that's not typically covered in resume sessions is dissecting the job posting, and it's what I want to talk about now. You want to identify the job requirements and extract them and put them in a table. Okay, in the left column with two rows, the name of the company or the job. The first row, the second row has got the actual description, and then your experience on the right-hand side. And how does it match up? It doesn't have to be a perfect match. You can use that table as the middle paragraph in a cover letter or a T letter, and you can use it as a guide during the phone review. And we'll take a look at that in just a second. But here's an example of that. This was an actual job posting from a company called DXC, which is at Renner Road and Central here in Richardson. It's kind of condensed to get it onto the slide, but you can notice the education and the requirements that are down there. We took a look at that. I had the candidate take those requirements and put them in the left column. You can notice what it is there. The left column over on the right-hand side for his experience, which is the next side. And he matched those up. Again, those matches don't have to be perfect. But what that does is give you talking points when you have a phone interview, but it can also help you to tailor the resume. We took the title of the job and put that in there, as you notice, and we took 3 of those items from his accomplishments and put them in. They map and match what the requirements are. And again, that's important because that's what appears in the first third of a page on your resume when it's first opened up. Again, that's what you're trying to do, is get somebody to click down or scroll down on your resume when it comes up online. This is, in terms of that, this is a little hard to read, but up here on the right, it says business analyst, and you notice how it appears. The title over here is business analyst. It appears here in the resume. The next slide, and this is, apologize that it's hard to read. Again, having the process there, they're over here in the skills table, areas of expertise as well. You can use that, go out as a phone interview guide, that requirements table. When you get the phone interview, and probably most interviews start with a phone interview today, you have the job posting, your resume, and this job requirements table on your table or on your desk, and it gives you some talking points to talk about. It also allows you, when you've answered the question after they say, well, tell me a little bit about yourself, you can ask at the end of that, when you've talked for about 30 seconds or 60 seconds, done your elevator pitch, you can ask the question, I've told you a little bit about me. Can you tell me a little bit about the ideal candidate that you're looking for? Which tends to verify the requirements over here. And gives you an idea of what the hot ones are, because there may be 10 or 15 requirements, and they may only talk about 3 or 4 of them. So it gives you an idea of what they want to talk about, but then that allows you, those short statements over here allow you to talk about the things that are important to them. Let's move on. Again, one of the things that you want to do about getting is make sure that the keywords appear in your resume. I mentioned my Siebel example. Those candidates that had Siebel in their resume 10 times are a lot more likely to get considered than the one that only had it once. Include your accomplishments, the measurable results of your performing your duties. Also, you want to apply to postings within 72 hours. The exception to that is possibly if the job is a hard to fill position or you have some pretty unique skills. You want to focus on getting your resume into the hands of the recruiter and hiring manager. Use LinkedIn to find out who that hiring manager is and become an employee referral. And use those different delivery channels that I mentioned to you. Occasionally still find managers that ask for that purple scroll. And this was a magazine that came out for recruiters in the early 90s. And it talked about the ideal candidate, that perfect squirrel or the purple squirrel. There aren't too many of them around that I've ever seen, but that purple squirrel, I'll get it straight yet, is the candidate who has all the qualifications being sought, the education, the experience, and they'll work for peanuts. Don't find too many of them, but when I did find a hiring manager that wanted that, I would do my research and sourcing, come up with a couple of candidates and say, you know, I haven't found anybody that matches all of your requirements, but I've got a couple that are close. Why don't you take a look at these and see if they won't fit? Usually they would at least look at those and interview one or two, and frequently would often hire those. So that's something to consider. Big deal about accomplishments, and I won't go through too much of this, is how do you go about that? These are ways that you can come up with that. Again, if you want the slide deck, it's lockealderson@gmail.com. But one of the things, as I mentioned, talking about duties and responsibilities, if you don't talk about what you achieved, what was the results, what was the importance of that, again, it may not get considered. It may be considered as fluff. Likewise, down here it says, so what? What's the significance? What's the rest of the story? Does it tell a complete story? So those are things to consider when you talk about your accomplishments. Let's take a look at some resumes now. Okay, this particular resume is an actual candidate I talked to a number of years ago, so I've updated the dates, but it does have his name and contact information up here. Again, you don't have to have your street address anymore on that, but it does have his contact information and his email address. He's got a headline, okay? He's got a skills summary or a summary of attributes, if you will, his major strengths. Spelled out there. He's got his title of his company, a one-line descriptor of who the company is. This is the bottler, okay, as opposed to the syrup company in Atlanta. Okay, he's the plant manager. He talks about some of his accomplishments here. There are 3 bulleted accomplishments. So that's a resume that's pretty easy to follow in terms of that. Another type of resume that I mentioned is a resume that's all bullets. You noticed on this down the margin there are about 15 bullets. Again, in 10 seconds, you're asking me, what are you asking me to pay attention to? Nothing wrong with that. And that's a type of resume that's come into vogue. I don't see as many of them I used to. But again, it sells what somebody does. They're real short. They start with an active verb kind of statements. I suggested to this candidate they break up his job into the duties and responsibilities and follow it up with what his actual accomplishments were. We broke it up the next time. His duties are on top and his accomplishments are at the bottom. Again, this is a resume, and I show this because there are another type of resume called hybrid resume or functional type resumes, and recruiters tend to not like functional resumes simply because they tell what you've done, what you may have accomplished, but they fail to talk about when you did it or who you worked for. So this was a resume of an individual who was looking to change career fields. She was a teacher in Louisville, Kentucky. Again, she lists out her education and experience. And that I suggested she switch to a hybrid resume, which is kind of a combination of functional and reverse chronological. And that's what they looked at. We took out and listed her areas of expertise: customer relations, communications, and public relations. And again, it broke those down. What were accomplishments in those 3 areas? And down at the bottom, if you notice down here, I think I can show that. It's still the reason that recruiters don't like that. It has her experience down there and who she worked for. But again, these are the areas of functional expertise that she has in her situation. Another functional resume is mine, and I do have a hybrid resume. And when I was applying for recruiter type positions, I noticed I've got the title of recruiting manager. I've got 3-line summary up there. And this was a resume where the company was actually looking for an individual who had gone to a top 10 business school in the United States. And at that time, University of California, Berkeley is among those, depending on whose survey you look at. in the top 10. So that's why it was at the top of the resume. Normally, education appears at the bottom. But I also talked about experience and accomplishments. My resume there has 5 sections because it was talking about management. Management was one of the sections I included, and these are the accomplishments that I had in that. I also had recruiting and employment, which was also there. Okay, and I had my employment history there at the bottom. Okay, so that makes it easy. So that's if you're looking to change career fields or you've been out of the job market for a while. It's one way to deal with that. You can also include, by using that experience that's a little bit further back in your resume and your experience, and they're looking for today. Well, that's another type of resume that you can look at. It also has my LinkedIn URL at the top up there. Some final tips to consider. Again, if you don't match the requirements, don't apply. Apply within 72 hours of the posting. Again, get it in early. Have a scannable resume. Again, don't put your contact information in the header. Again, proofread the resume. Can't emphasize it enough. The headline is very important because that may be what you're remembered for. The headline, again, the summary should be kind of short. 3 to 4 lines is a good idea, and a couple of bulleted accomplishments, and dissect the job posting. It's worth the time and effort to do it. Again, it takes probably about 10 minutes the first time you do it. And each time you do after that, a lot of those accomplishments that you have are going to be pretty easy to come by. The alternative delivery methods, again, snail mail, FedEx, or employee referral are important. And use those keywords from the job posting. Again, by doing that job requirements table, some of those keywords are going to appear in your accomplishments, and you can plug them into your resume to make it easy. That's a way to tailor your resume without going to a lot of effort rewriting your resume for each posting that you see. Some final thoughts. Again, keywords and phrases. Focus on your most recent position. There was an ad about the, I'll skip that. But anyway, what have you done most recently? Because that's usually the most valuable experience that you have. Use a reverse chronological order and quantify your achievements. Okay. When you can add numbers and percentages, it adds impact for somebody's mind. And do sweat the details, the small stuff. Okay, anything else? Don't include references. Okay. There's my contact information, Locke Alderson Gmail, if you want a copy of the slide. And Jeff, I'm done.
All right, well, we've got a couple questions here for you. Tim asked, regarding an ATS system, I have a resume version that is pure text and no formatting at all. It is written in TextPad, which is just regular notepad. When I upload it into a job application that I can view after uploading, I find many data points in the wrong field, titles and location fields, etc. How do you overcome this? Is there a specific sequence that data should be listed on your resume so that it can be imported properly? Any ideas?
Well, it's easy to, I guess, I don't particularly care for text resumes, but that's one way to ensure that what you have in your resume is actually recorded in the applicant tracking software. Again, one of the things about highlighting some of your accomplishments.
I think, Tim, the answer here is there's well over 300 different ATS systems out there. You don't know what system they're using. I mean, you can sort of sometimes tell because it comes up as a subdomain.
But even if they've chosen the most expensive system, they might have turned all the options on. I know I was with Siebel and we were looking at installing Taleo, which was subsequently purchased by Oracle Corporation. Again, we looked into that and how do you do things. It also had some front end questions that you had to answer when you apply. But again, applying online is one way to cover some of that stuff.
Right. And so, yeah, there's really no great way to make that happen. So, it's really whatever works out best, Another question, if you do not use a header, should you put your name and contact information on page 2 as well?
You could do, that's one okay use of the header. You could do that on the second page. Again, it used to be when resumes were printed out, it was pretty important that you did that. Again, it's not quite as critical anymore because most of the time resumes are going to show up on your computer. The recruiter is looking for. That's another reason not to use an 8-point font because it makes it hard to read. I can do an adjustment with it on my computer to make it larger or smaller. But again, by doing that, again, if somebody wanted to print it out and it's in an 8-point font, it makes it very difficult to read. Likewise, if you put take up all the space on your resume and only have small margins, again, it makes it more difficult to read. Again, try and think about your reader.
Okay. Right. Let's see here. Another question. Let's see. You mentioned words not to mention in soft skills. What are suggestions for soft skills that you should include?
Well, those words that I mentioned were kiss of death words. It's okay to use those if you amplify and give examples to support them. But without the support, they come across as fluff. Okay. Yes, you may have done that, but so what? The answer I mentioned is, so what is one of the questions. Take a look at your resume and ask the question, so what? Does it answer the questions that they're looking for in the resume?
All right. See, Mike says, I streamline my resume to make it more ATS friendly, but feel it's really boring now with more white space, but without a professional look. Any thoughts on this challenge? Well,
I would ask you the question, okay, have you included any accomplishments under your duties? Have you included accomplishments under your summary? If you haven't, that's the area where you can talk about yourself and what you've done. These are your selling points and make it valuable, because the implication is that's what I've done. That's what the value that I bring to your company. And if that doesn't show up, you're not doing a very good job of selling yourself.
All right. Anybody else have any questions?
We do have some time, Jeff, if we have some people wanted to look at their resumes and they can tell us their name, or if they can shoot the copy. I guess we could do that. How do you do that when you take a look at the resumes on your sessions?
Well, usually I have them send them to me at the beginning of the session, so that way I can get them preloaded up. So we won't do that. Veronica has put a comment in here. I had an experience where I matched 80%, and when I asked the recruiter questions, he had no answers and told me he was only 4 weeks in. What do you do in this case? Well, you got to recognize who the recruiters are. Sometimes they get thrown in to fill a gap, and they really don't understand what they have. They may have the job posting and the resume. They try and match it up as best they can. They may not even be able to answer the questions about that. So, and do a good job of that. As you know, from having worked with the pit crew, and when I was on the pit crew, I always wanted to take a look at somebody's resume and the job posting so I could write some good questions to draw out somebody in that situation. But there are poor recruiters in the field that don't know what they're doing. They shouldn't be in recruiting. They're maybe not prepared, but again, they may be doing the best that they can as well. All right. Well, somebody did send me a resume. So give me just a second here. I will get it up on the screen. Let's see here. Click to open. Did I need to quit sharing? I did. I've already stopped you from sharing. So, all right, let me get it called up here. Give me a second. Oops. Used to be when we did workshops, we would take a look at everybody's resume. If they brought a copy of the resume, we'd take a quick look at it. So right. Okay. So here is Tim's resume. Okay. Tim has a 2-page resume. First thing that I noticed, it's kind of busy looking. Okay. Your margins are probably a 1/2 inch on each side. I would tend to use a little bit more space. Go to that 3rd page, if you will. Okay, scroll down a little bit. Jeff already actually has a 3-page resume. Okay, I would try and cut down, slim down the prior experience. Typically with the prior experience, you want the name of the company, the dates, a tagline if the company's not well known. Again, but you had a number of positions when you were, say, with McLean down in Waco or Temple. Okay. But maybe you want to just have the name of the job, the title of the job, the company, and one accomplishment that you had there. But again, first thought I would have would be to trim down your experience. Tim, is this like your master resume and you cut it down when you see a job that you're applying to, or is this just what you send out?
Jeff, that's what I typically send out.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is overkill. I think, you know, as Veronica mentioned before, when she had this recruiter who was only 4 weeks in, what you've got to customize your resume. And the object is, if they're asking for these things, you just want to make sure that they can see that this is what they're looking for. You know, you've done a lot of great things. Everybody on the call has done a lot of really great things here. But if they don't ask about it, you don't need to tell them about it. And one of the things you may want to do towards the end of this, now, here are a couple issues I have. Number one is, it's great that you've done this stuff, but
It's
I
too
want to
many.
know where you've done these things at.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I
hopefully,
would cut that in half at least.
yeah, I mean, it's
And
too many.
use that relevant experience that you're showing in that area to support your headline. What's the headline of the job that you're applying for?
Yeah, see, he doesn't even have a headline listed.
Yeah,
You know,
he has
have-
distribution operations leaders, what I would call his headline. Under his name,
Oh, yeah, here we go.
again, but that's not where the computer's gonna look for the headline.
Right, they're gonna look for it as a separate line here.
A separate line item, okay?
Right. Your skills and qualifications, are those in a table or are those like this tab, tab, tab?
Those are tab, tab, tab.
Okay,
That's fine.
very good. I would recommend you cut it down to 9 instead of 15, because, you know, take the ones, you know, this is great as a master resume, but then go and cut out the things that they're not asking about. Because, you know, if you get a new recruiter who's only been doing this for 5 or 6 weeks or 5 or 6 months, they may have no clue. They were given a job description that said, find me somebody who can do this. And they're just trying to find somebody who matches. When you tell them all this other stuff, it may be a little bit more than they can handle.
So what would you do if you're just talking to, you know, a generic recruiter that you're getting to know, not for a specific position, just someone at a big firm? How do you approach that? Because you don't know what they're looking for at the time.
Well, that's when I would use the one-page bio.
Yeah.
Okay.
What do you want to be known for? Again, you know, you meet people in a social setting and you give your 30-second pitch or your 30-second commercial. And what do you do? And you're given that, and they have a hook that they label you by. And so, Tim, if I ask, who are you? What are you going to tell me in 10 words or less? That's what you want to focus on. And you may have multiple things. You may have been a jack of all trades. But as I said, as a recruiter, I've never recruited for a jack of all trades. That's never been one of the search terms that I looked at.
Right. One of the things you may want to also add, like towards the end here, is prior relevant experience.
Yeah.
And all
You
you
cut
do is underneath there, you list the name of the company and your job title. And that's it. No dates.
No dates, but also if you had a specific accomplishment, you know, where you reduced inventory by 22% to 2.4 million, that may be one item that you have under that. But do that for all the others, we'll say with Dell Computer, or because that experience is, what have you done for me recently? What have you done lately? Yes, that experience is valuable, and maybe for the job that you're applying for, that's why the reason you may go to a slightly different resume format.
Right. And you know, and by putting a section called prior relevant experience, what that also allows you to do is you can then talk about those in an interview. You know, if something would come up as one of those other things or something they're looking for. So I'm going to put in the chat window for everybody a sample resume, and you'll sort of see a little bit spacing wise. You'll see the prior relevant experience section. Let me go find that. Give me a second here.
And as I said, if anybody wants the slide deck to take a look at all those resumes that are in there, it's lockealderson@gmail.com. I'll be happy to send you the slides.
Right. And then just one more thing I want to mention. This past Friday, let me stop sharing this. This past Friday at the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group, we had a speaker who talked about, a different speaker from Houston, about your resume in a different kind of format. And, you know, all of his bullet points are very simple. So there's a YouTube video there from the Friday meeting. You're going to go in about 25 minutes from the start of the meeting, and you'll be able to go, you know, view that thing. So that's something, it's just something different, a different view on resumes that may be helpful.
As I pointed out, if you give your resume to 100 people, you might get 100 different opinions.
Yeah.
So, and if what the other thing I'll say about resumes, if what you're doing now isn't working, try some of the new stuff. You can always switch back and see what results you get.
Yeah. I mean, if you're getting phone calls, you're doing something right. If you're not getting phone calls, you need to mix things up, get those phone calls. Try something new. All right. Well, Locke, thank you very much for your time today. Let me share a few slides and we'll get out of here. Let me switch things around so I can see what's going on here. So Career DFW and Career USA, we're putting on training 4 days a week. We really, come back and join us tomorrow morning, as I mentioned, at the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. Rick Martinez will be with us to talk about 21 tips for an effective job search in today's ever-changing market. Rick runs R2 Technologies. He's a professional recruiter. He's looking to find you. He wants to make things easy. So he'll give us 21 tips. If you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area tomorrow, please, please, please come join us in person so you can network with everybody else who's there. If you live outside the DFW area, you can join us on Zoom or Facebook Live. Next Tuesday, our speaker is Terry Sullivan to talk about LinkedIn. We talk about LinkedIn every Tuesday. How to create a LinkedIn brand that tells your key contacts who you are, what you do, and how you can help. Please note, Terry doesn't allow his presentations to be recorded. So if you do want to watch it, you do need to watch it live next Tuesday. And then next Wednesday, the practice interview team will have an actual practice interview that you can watch. We had a great interview this yesterday, and we'll have another one scheduled for next week. If you'd like to schedule your own free practice interview, just go to dallaspickroo.com for more information. Next Thursday, being the 4th Thursday of the month, we're going to talk all about networking. Every session, we have a different speaker who shares your thoughts on networking. So come join us for that next Thursday. This session has been recorded. You will be able to go back and watch it at your leisure on the Career DFW Facebook page or the Career USA YouTube channel. On the Career USA YouTube channel, click on playlist. I have over 500 videos on the channel. So if you click on playlist, every video I put in goes into one of 7 different playlists. You can click there where you see it says effective resumes, where that red arrow is. Click on view full playlist. You don't want to click on the video, but click on, I don't know which video pops up when you do that, but at the very bottom, if you click on view full playlist, up will come a list of all the different dates and speakers and topics. You can go back and watch any one of these speakers that we've had over the years.
Jeff, one of the things in the chat window, and I'll mention it because it's in the careerdfw.org on their website, are keywords that you can use. It had terms to convey that you've had a project, department, or division, words that you can use, active verbs that you can use that are helpful to beefing up that resume. Again, for the individual said, I've gotten it. It's okay for the ATS system. Now I need to beef it up. Well, you might want to use stronger verbs and some of that. And there is on the Career DFW site. I don't know where it is, Jeff, but I've seen it before because I've copied it down and used it from something else.
Yeah, in fact, I just posted 185 powerful verbs that'll make your resume stand out. So that's in the chat window. If you want to download the chat, click on those little 3 dots and save the chat, or you can download those documents by just clicking on the document. Just remember where you save it at, though. If you're not receiving emails about our workshops, you'd like to join the Career USA mailing list, just scan the QR code right there, or you can send an email to Career USA, the +sign, subscribe to groups.io. You'll never be spammed, but what you will get is the topic of the day, the title of the day, and most importantly, the Zoom link of the day. That way you can find out what we're talking about and just open up the email and join us. Let's see here, keep going. Please remember, Career DFW, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. All of our speakers are volunteers, lots of volunteer. I'm a volunteer. Everything I've done over the last 14 and a half years has just been to help you land your next great opportunity. So thank you very much for joining us today, everybody. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow morning for a very interesting presentation at the North Dallas Group. Locke, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.